Here begins the third episode of my Pencast conversation with Lars Karlsson, Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting at AP Møller-Maersk and a leader in customs, borders, and international trade policy. So let's talk about the experiment that was TradeLens,
Yes.
the 2008 Maersk IBM joint venture that to build a blockchain-enabled global trade platform, which was discontinued to great surprise of many in November 2022. What kind of experiences and what kind of learning process did you go through that will allow Maersk and others and the world to adopt to do better the next time in terms of actually building a sustainable platform for digitalization?
No, it's a great question, and to your big surprise, I've been asked it before, and I think many of my colleagues in Maersk have been asked that question as well. And many of my colleagues today, where I work, used to work in TradeLens as well. So obviously, that's part of the answer to your question. Now, we were early up because this was just in the beginning of the strategy I just described, that we want to change. We believe in data digitalization. We believe in trade compliance. We believe in offering our services an end-to-end type of solutions rather than the world we lived in at the time. Obviously, blockchain, obviously digitalization platforms or independent ones was extremely important, didn't exist. So we took an initiative to learn more about this for our own platforms. At the time, many that was, again, not connected, not interoperable and so forth at the time, to see if we could create this, in that case, together with IBM and a number of clients. And it became very successful. And people get surprised when they hear me say that, but it was in the sense for what it was purposed to do. So the idea was, of course, we will finance it, we will develop it together with IBM. And at one time or another, it becomes, first of all, a known company that is independent from Maersk. We are just one of the users of this platform. And that was also the reason why several of our competitors joined onto TradeLens with their logistic data and their trade data and commercial data in a safe and secure way. And that was the aim of it. So the set out was the right one. And it was also a time frame for it, because the whole point was this is not going to be a merged universe, because if we are going to be an integrator, sometimes works with our competitors, sometimes always work with our partners, then we need to have that exchange of data also through this platform. So it needs to have some promises to the others. If you actually put your data on, it's your data, we will not look at it. It will not do things that disturbs your business models too much. So it will become a independent, self-sufficient, self-financed and profitable, whatever, type of platform, and somebody needs to own it. Our idea at the time, or the people who were here, was that it would be a standalone, company, first a joint venture and then become a company on its own. There was a timeline for that. Now, what we learned through the process, enormously much. So how to get the data, how to collect the data, how you actually interact and the interfaces with those who provide the data, protecting the data, use and reuse the data, all of those issues from legal perspectives, from use perspectives, from technical perspectives, from onboarding perspectives with different types of type of different systems out there you need to connect to and so forth, and including doing that with governments, not only with private sector clients, because that's the whole point. Was a fantastic experience. And I always describe it as expensive learning, right? It was not a failure. People say, it failed. I said, no, it didn't fail. It did a lot of what we wanted to do. It didn't do two things at the end. It didn't become at the timeline we had agreed with partners and people using the system that it was standalone, viable as a commercial entity at the time. And while it wasn't, of course, the alternative would have been to agree with everybody, well, we do it 2 more years and we will continue to finance it. And 2 years from now, we come to the same decision point saying, is it now viable? We will let it go. It's not our baby anymore. It's somebody else's. How long can we do that with the promise we made to the industry that we are an integrator of trade that also have an open policy to who we work with, right? So that was one part of the problem. The second part of the problem, who's taking this over? Is it an independent company that can do it, or do it need also to have maybe an institutional body involved. There'll be somebody that seems to be and not somebody from the industry. Like, again, you can get the international institutions or the international organization like ICC or wherever it could have been. And obviously, in hindsight, it would have been good to have an observer board or a strategic advisory board with, World Bank and World Customs Organization and World Trade Organization or UN or, ICC, whoever it might be, on from the beginning. And maybe two of them would have raised their hand at a certain point and say, we can take this over, right? We will find funding from someone else, donor funding or government funding or whatever it is, independent funding. And we are happy to take this over from you and now run it as an independent platform. The second issue, in my own personal view as well, I know that many share with me, is of course that we also limited the possibilities for this independent platform run by us. That was supposed to be independent from a commercial point of view, short-termly, by saying, well, you can't use the data you have on for this and this. That's not your purpose. That is my purpose, and the others we agreed on. You can't become a broker here. You can't become a insurance company using the data for that, which of course would have been part of taking the financial responsibility for getting it to become self-sufficient from a funding and commercial point of view. But on the other hand, that would have become something else than an independent platform blockchain for data. Right. So I think those two were part of the things. I think there's also a learning process. And again, it's my thinking rather than a corporate policy here. So I need to say that, right? That disclaimer is that there's also been changes over 4 or 5 years, right? Where we thought that blockchain was the only answer, we now know that blockchain is part of the answer. Sometimes it's really important to have the data in blockchains. There are also other solutions that doesn't have to be in blockchain. It actually, can very easily be transferred in a safe and secure way in other means. So while there's still a need for these independent type of platforms on blockchain, and we use them, and we have partners that today that we use. And of course, what we did in learning from a Møller perspective with traders was taking home all of that knowledge because it was ours. We actually developed. Our people are still in Møller doing the same thing, but for us now. And together with partners we use for blockchain and partners we use for other platforms, and integrating our own platforms into a landscape that is interoperable. So we actually can do these data management of the international supply chain in a good way, right? So extremely expensive learning, but also fantastic learning to take us where we are right now. And also the world changed in the meantime. So what seemed to be the right thing to do at one certain time, of course, was only a part of the solution later on.
Fascinating. Yeah. And expensive learning is how you learn, how you actually, if you don't take a risk, no risk, no reward, right?
No, of course.
What would you say, just off the top of your head, were the top 3 things, most valuable things you learned? We've talked about it around it, but if you were to list 3 things that you learned from the TradeLens experience, what would they be?
Now, very much it is possible. The percentage we had of data at the time when actually that decision came was enormous, right? So we did it on board. There are different numbers there, but just take a conservative number, more than 60% or close to 70% of the data in the areas we were talking about, and still adding on new things like, again, exchange of data with governments was already in the, not in the plan, but operational and so forth, where again, you could get better border processing because, clients through the one interface to TradeLens rather than 10 interfaces or 20 interfaces to directly actually could get data for risk management, for various, border management type of processes. That was already done. So, of course, the number one, how to manage data in international supply chain that normally had data on papers. That's the biggest knowledge, understanding. How do you collect it? How do you get it? How do you process it? How do you data lake it? How do you handle it? How do you actually get your analysis tools into it and so forth? The technical side and the practical side. I would say the practical side is certainly probably the biggest one, where you actually learn how to onboard users into a platform. And that doesn't matter if it's TradeLens or the Møller platforms we use today. It's the same knowledge, understanding of how to get to that point. The second thing I think is the customer orientation, right? Really having that dialogue with customers around their data. And I use that knowledge from some of the people that used to work with this that is now in my team on customs. every day, right? Because the reality of it, I tell people today, data is gold in the bank. Your customs data is gold in the bank. You need to treat it as gold in the bank. I've met companies very recently who say, first question I asked them, how many brokers do you have in where you're situated? And they say 45. So why do you have 45 brokers in a landlocked country? It's totally, there's no reason for that. So we don't know. So I said, do you have all the data from those brokers? They said, no. Oh. Well, you don't manage your data. So you don't know if you're trade compliant. You don't know if you actually are efficient. You actually do not know which are the good ones or the bad ones out of those stakeholders, more than you locally know them. And you basically carry a legacy of businesses you bought or practices you had from a totally different world around us, with other demands, with totally different type of requirements than you need today. You need to bring all of that home. Doesn't mean you need one operational model, you need one partner. It's up to you to decide if you're decentralized or centralized, if you have an internal unit for supply chain management, the logistics and customs or whatever it is, or you outsource. It doesn't matter. The model needs to be the same. You need to be in control of your data. You need to own it. You need to know what it is. You need to know that somebody you trust is also managing it for you in a correct way. And by that, what happens is that you can become not only safer and sleep better at night, which is one of the changes I've seen. Like I always say, 5 years ago, coming into a C-level group or of people or a board, it took me like 20 minutes to convince them that they had a customs problem. Of course, when I asked, they said, no, I don't think so. Maybe it's too expensive. That's the only thing, right? But to do it. And then after 20 minutes, we agreed maybe we have some issues we need to look at. Today, they come to us. And they describe the problem they have with not knowing if the classification of goods is the correct one, if they fulfill the obligations for forced labor regulations in the United States, if they actually meet the new carbon border adjustment mechanism requirements of Europe. Because these type of regulations that we are seeing now, supply chain, multi-tier, so you need to know more than yourself. If you not only have your own data, how can you manage that in the correct way? And if you don't manage it in the correct way, going back to what happens in a world where you have trade wars and conflicts and protectionism, is that you are exposing yourself to risk that is multiplied from before. It's not only about a fine or a penalty or a fee. It's about market access. It's about draconic penalties. It's about that being used, you're not compliant, you're not allowed to import this anymore because we are protecting our own industry in this field, or whatever it might be. So, of course, the stakes have been going much higher when it comes to trade compliance. But more importantly, it's actually bad business. You're actually paying too much. Companies are overpaying 5 to 7%. We know that from studies on customs duties, because the systems to get to simplification, trade facilitation, free trade agreement utilization is too complicated for them, so they don't. Or the service providers they are using, they think as clients, these service providers knows what they're doing. The local one I have in this country, he would definitely make sure I pay as little as possible. Well, surprise, surprise, they don't, because they don't have this overview. They don't have this end-to-end holistic perspective of looking at this from a bigger field, and then you're overpaying. And that is a lot of money today. When you go into a company, you look at the data, and you find that some of these companies are overpaying not 5 to 7, but 10% in duties around the world. If you're a global company, I can tell you, it raises some really interesting reactions in boards and C-level management meetings.
Well, it sounds
prove that.
It sounds, what you started off with is that in 5 years, things are going to change. And part of that is because the world has changed around us and made it possible. And it sounds like the difference between 5 years ago, when you had to spend 20 minutes convincing a group of directors that they had a customs problem, to them coming to you proactively and saying, help us with our customs problem, which we know we have. That's itself, the world has changed. Is that because of the various black swan events, COVID and Ukraine war and Red Sea disruptions, or is
100%? No, it is. It's I would say like that. That is probably the biggest driver for the change, and it's not everyone who have discovered this yet. Let's put it this way. It depends on where you're situated, where your big market is, where there has been more of these events, where we actually seen the consequence, and that has taken a hit on your basically your sales numbers at the end of the day and your bottom line results, and you try to go backwards and say, what was the problem? Well, we have too many delays, or we've had a problem with this in this entry port, or whatever it is. So it actually goes to that granularity. But one of them is that driver. The other one is that people have started to, and the big companies certainly have started to see that I need to be, also sustainable. I also need to be more compliant. And the reason, and then you start looking where your risks are themselves. And you would be surprised how many of them who comes into meetings where they actually describe a customs problem, but they don't know it's a customs problem. And maybe, our top level people and my boss is in a meeting with where he's sponsoring some of our key clients. And then he goes out of the meeting, calls me and says, look, it seems like they have a customs problem here. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it sounds like it. And we go in and it is a customs problem, right? So sometimes they've seen the symptoms, they've seen the consequence, and they are themselves in a situation where they do want a control tower. And today we have control towers for all the parts of this. We have control towers for customs. We have control towers for the supply chain and the logistic chain and so forth, right? Just by using the data in that way, you can be more secure where you are, and but you can be just a better competitor on the market. So those who are moving quicker are the ones who thinks, I need a mobile phone now that doesn't look like the old one. I'm just going to do a screen all over for it and no template anymore. That could be digital. So, well, you can't do that. You need I need to be able to key in. I need the keypad here. Those are the ones that we see in our clients that says, I have a vision to do this. Seems to be, what you're doing as well. Can we co-design? Can we do these solutions together? So there's one drive where some part of the business, and they take with them, of course, their supply chain on that journey, where we are trying to fit in, and we're still learning by doing. And then there's the other one, which is the trade compliance piece that is just becoming the biggest issue for international trade for years to come. And of course, those macros are continuing to drive that process, right? People have seen what it means to be delayed. People have seen what a pandemic means. Next time it's something else. It's not a pandemic, it's something else. But it still will have the same consequence if you are not prepared, if you don't have a strategic plan on what to do when that happens to minimize the risks. And final point on that, what we're doing right now is bringing in, of course, very smart people together with our own thousands and thousands of engineers to look at how we're handling that data now from an artificial intelligence perspective. How can we predict risks, de-risk by actually knowing in beforehand there's a high level of risk that this will happen or that delay will happen, and by that basically rerouting before it happens to start later, and again changing the system to be more flexible so we can handle more of the risk we've seen that this specific company is in line of being faced by for the years to come. And of course, strategically, that has moved from being a transactional business that you need to buy a service for somewhere because it's necessary evil. You need to do it to pass a border, because out of all the things we do in movement, customs is the only obligatory thing there. You can't pass the border by not doing it. There's no option, right? In the future, maybe in 5 years, but definitely in 10 years, you will be able to move cross borders without customs declarations. And I'm swearing in church now, and I know many of my colleagues will say that's not possible. But it's possible already today with the international conventions and legislation we have, because it means just one of the definitions what a customs declaration is. That could be access to commercial data in real time or in advance, where you do all your risking automatically by AI systems, and you make sure that whatever intervention needs to be there can be done in the ultimate place in the supply chain, not necessarily at borders. And for that, we don't need a separate declaration at a certain time. You basically an online all the time declaration that now and then, just like we do on tax for quarterly or monthly or whatever it is, a periodic declaration once a year or every 10 years would actually just do an audit on was this a good outcome or not for both parties here. So we are moving in that direction. It's still data. It's more data. But again, it might not be in the shapes we have today.
Yeah, shipments without a border or without customs impinging. I guess de facto, we already have created certain situations like e-commerce from China, where 4 billion shipments. De facto, we can't do customs on that in a way that would be satisfying. But you're
not
talking
with the old
about,
model, at least, right?
Right,
Not with
the
the
old model.
traditional transactional model. Then
Yeah.
there would be 1 billion declarations in Netherlands or Rotterdam and Schiphol in just a matter of time, and it's just impossible. It's impossible to manage the process.
So evolve or die, for sure. Well, I want to talk about your experience with KGH, which the company that you built and evolved, and how your daily work has changed as you've entered Maersk. But first I want to take advantage of, since I'm speaking with a futurist and a leading customs consultant, I'd like to pick your brains for a moment about PenCP, the Pan-European Network of Customs Practitioners. I mean, its aim is to accelerate innovation in customs across customs technical areas, include 3 major customs technical areas: data and risk management. We've been talking a lot about that. Detection technologies and laboratory equipment, and through a range of knowledge instruments, technology grants, challenge competitions, innovation awards, and so on. Thinking out loud here, how could PenCP do a better job of fostering innovation on the one hand, and also bridging the gaps between public and private, between customs and research entities like universities and research institutes? What would you recommend if you were working as a consultant to make PenCP's work more insightful?
We can arrange that, by the way. There will be an invoice coming, of course, if you ask me that in more commercial terms. But of course, I am a consultant. No, jokes aside, I'll take you back a little bit, because I think that I'm a customs guy. So, I always say, of course, like everybody was, I just entered into customs by coincidence. It was just an accident, basically. So take you back in 4th of November this year, I've been in customs 40 years. So that's my celebration day, 4th of November, 2024. And
you started as a summer job, right, in Swedish customs?
I started as a summer job. It's the only job I ever applied for. I always say that, and it's true. So what happened was I was in uni, and I was doing semi-professional sports. I had other plans, and my mother had a sister. So my cousin was actually working in Swedish customs at the time. And he let her know, and my aunt told my mother and said, look, you need some, extra money here, because you're a poor student, and the sports isn't paying off really well at the time, right? So, you need money. So I said, okay, I need a 3 months, in the break job, and customs were looking for people. So I applied, and I got a job there. It just happens that, like many of our careers actually, happens in real life. Like Lennon said, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. Was the fact that I was studying IT for the moment. At that time, I was going into the IT industry, which was 80s, big time. And customs starting for the 3rd time to do a national processing system for Swedish customs. So they started asking these new people that was only in temporarily and got a temporary kind of study, right? And they asked and said, look, any of you are interested in coming in and do IT work in customs? And I said, yeah, I can probably do that. And then I got one job there, and then I continued to study, and I got another job, and I become project manager of that specific project, where I was lucky in the sense that was a time where everything fell into place, right? So we did the first digital signature ever. We took away all the paper documents as the first customs administration in the world. We had also the government doing a lot on broadband and overall investments in the country. We were ranked the #1 IT country 4 years in a row. Customs took advantage of that, of being an old-fashioned, and we modernized the entire thing. We did the first authorized economic operator program, Stairway, in Sweden, which became later, when I worked in World Customs Organization, the standard in Safe Framework of Standards. We did the first single trade window, the first one-stop shop, the first, green corridor price. All of those things happened.
You were busy.
We were busy, and it ended up with also me going out and taking different, leadership jobs in customs, and ended up with me being the Deputy Director General and Acting Director General at one time. And then what happened was that government came and said, look, we now have 9/11, international standards are going from trade facilitation with Sweden as a free trade country kind of likes to becoming more security oriented. We need to be involved here. So there's a job coming up in World Customs Organization, and we would like you to apply for that. And it's a election process. There were 9 countries applying for the job, and we went for a small presidential election tour around the world, spoke to countries, and I actually ended up getting elected, and were in WCO setting standards for 6 years, including the Safe Framework of Standards and implementation of that.
This concludes the third part of my Pencast conversation with Lars Karlsson, Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting at AP Møller-Maersk. Tune in soon for the fourth and final segment of our talk. Thank you.